Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this IGE forum this morning. It's a rather cold day, but I very much appreciate your coming to join us this morning. It's a great pleasure seeing you this morning, despite the cold weather. And before we get started, as usual, a piece of housekeeping note. We have simultaneous translation throughout this presentation, so please feel free to use a headset placed on the table as you need it. Today, I'm so very excited to have a very distinguished speaker, Mr. Jerome Glenn, as our special guest at the IGE Lecture Forum. I'm very confident that his exceptional insights will help us better understand how our future economy and society will be reshaped by the fourth industrial revolution. Most importantly, in the area of artificial intelligence, AI, which would have a profound impact on the future of humanity down the road. Dr. Glenn, Mr. Glenn doesn't really need any introduction. He's an internationally renowned futurist. But if I say a few words about his exceptional credentials, first of all, Mr. Glenn is the founder and CEO of the Millennium Project on Global Futures Research. He was the executive director of the American Council for the United Nations University. Mr. Glenn has over 40 years of futures research experience working for governments, international organizations, and private industry in science and technology policy, environmental security, economics, among other diverse related fields. Recent research includes Future Work, Technology 2050, and Future Elements of the Next Global Economy. Without further ado, let's welcome Mr. Glenn for his presentation for about 40 minutes, which will be followed by Q&A with our audience. Thank you very much. Okay.
All right, let's start with some basic things that I think we all agree on. Let's see. No, that's not. Aha, okay. I'm sure you have heard when people talk about AI and its effect on the society, people say, well, every time there's a big transition, somebody says going from agricultural age to industrial age, it's going to get rid of jobs. And when they go from the industrial age to the information or knowledge, you're going to lose jobs. So what's different this time? Why won't it be exactly the same? So what's different this time? One, the acceleration of change. I think everybody agrees the change is going a lot. Consider your life of your grandparents compared to yours. That's an extraordinary amount of change. Even your parents compared to you, a lot of change. Who would have believed 30 years ago that you would outproduce the United States in steel, communications technology, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Acceleration of change, and of course, the faster you go with new technology, the faster you're able to go. So it's the acceleration of the acceleration. That's new. The globalization, interactions, and synergies among NTs. NTs is a simple phrase meaning next technologies. Just like we have ICT that takes into account packet switching, data cables, software, we put it all together and we say ICT. because we don't want to keep repeating ourselves. Well, we don't have to keep saying nanotechnology, cognitive science, synthetic biology. It's just too much, right? So we say NT. But the NTs will have synergies among them. Look at how many different technologies are integrated into your cell phone, right? So that's new. You could say, well, there was a little globalization, 50 years ago. Yeah, not compared to today. 3, the existence of a global platform, the internet, which means we can transfer knowledge simultaneously and without error. In the 1980s, I was helping put around the world, in the third world mostly, what were called packet switching. That's what makes internet cheap. You make a packet out of your data and you switch it to a satellite. Packet switching, all right? Now, I had to get in an airplane, get out of an airport, talk to somebody, maybe a decision happens, and then get somewhere else. That takes years. You know when the internet protocol was created? 50 years ago. It's the 50th anniversary of the internet protocol. 1968-69. When did we start to use it for real? 1990. It took a long time. Now we have the platform that we didn't have before, and that changes things very fast and without errors. I might forget something when I talk to somebody, when I get out of the airplane, right? But now you hit a button and the whole world gets it simultaneously. Software, data. That's extraordinary. So imagine that one of you gets a new insight and simultaneously you all get the same insight. All right? Now, of course, if we create a collective intelligence system for your organization, maybe you can do that. But we don't have that on a regular basis, but we now have with software. That's new. Standardization of databases and protocols. When I was the United Nations University liaison between Tokyo and Washington, one of the things that we did is we had standards for answering the question, what did people eat today? Sounds sort of dumb and simple, but by having standards across the whole world, you can actually do research and learn, and learn, and learn. We didn't have that when we went from the industrial age to the information age. 5, few plateaus for pauses. This is really important, but it's hard to communicate. My first laptop was 1992. I now have a laptop. Now, granted, it's more powerful and all that, but it's still a laptop. So I had a chance to adjust to it. It didn't keep changing all over the place. You're all using laptops today. They look a little bit similar to laptops, a long time ago. But if you have AI pushing all of these things together, you don't have the same chance to adjust and get used to it. We accept the idea of a laptop computer. But what happens if in 1992 something else came out for contact lenses? You didn't have a chance to get used to it. Now you're in contact lenses. Now you're in implant. It's just too much. If we go in this direction that people think, it'll be difficult for society to adjust to the changes because of the speed. That's also new. 6, billions, not millions, billions of empowered people in relatively democratic free markets able to initiate activities. Go back to your grandparents or even your parents. What was the idea? It's a catch-up economy. We're going to follow. This is the way to do it. Right? Well, now much of the world is on an even playing field. The questions we'll talk about today are also being talked about in Silicon Valley together. There's no catch-up coming up, but we're inventing together. And the ability, you can connect. Half of the world can connect to half of the world. Over half the world's on the internet. We didn't have this ability before. People can initiate things. I don't know if you know the story about the landmine treaty. A woman in Maine didn't like the idea that children were being blown up by landmines around the world. It's not just the demilitarized zone, it's all around the world. Tons of them around the world. And so she initiated a conversation on the internet, which led to an international treaty. She, acting alone, initiated an important thing for the world. More and more people will be able to do that. That's new. In the past, we said, you're the boss, that's what I do. End of conversation. What's to think, right? Okay, so these are, and one last one, machines can learn how you do what you do and then do it better than you do. These are 7 reasons. So I stress this to begin with because I am very tired of hearing people say, yeah, there's nothing new under the sun. It's just, we're going to just create more jobs. Don't worry about that. Da, 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 da. These are 7 reasons to say that's not true. All right? So if you forget everything I say, you can now go to sleep. Remember these 7 points. Okay. Inevitability of new economics changing social contract with human beings. We know the concentration of wealth is increasing, right? Doesn't seem to matter where you are. Doesn't seem to matter whether you're in a socialist system or a capitalist system. Seems to be a species phenomenon. Income gaps are widening. Employmentless economic growth seems the new norm. Return on investment in capital and technology is usually better than on labor. Future technologies can replace much of human labor, mental and physical. Long-term structural unemployment is a business-as-usual, surprise-free forecast. Now, if you had over half the world unemployed, that's social chaos. That's a surprise-free forecast. So what do we do about this? The first thing we did is we read everybody else's work, right? Normal sort of thing. We read the research. And I'll give you a little feedback on that. One, not one of the 30 or 50 studies I read mentioned synthetic biology once. Synthetic biology is not gene editing. Gene editing is you take a species gene, you knock something, or DNA, you knock something out, you put something else in, or knock it out and leave it that way. But it's still a human, or it's still a rose, or it's still a turkey, right? Synthetic biology is not that. You stand in front of a computer screen, or sit, and you put together what are the capabilities you want a new kind of species to do. Clean the plaque in your brain, dust the floor. What does he want it to do? And you put together genetic material from completely different species electronically on a screen first. Then you test it out. Is it going to be coherent? Then you buy those biological products. One of the big suppliers is in Hong Kong, GenScript. And yes, I do own stock in GenScript. But you can now buy these parts so you can make species from scratch. Think of everything nature does that you can't do. That's a big business opportunity. So there's gigantic implications for synthetic biology. So I mentioned the one about, take the first one about the brain. If you can make an organism, microorganism, to go in the brain and clean out the plaque in the brain, that means when you're 99 years old, your brain can be as fresh as when you're 25. Now, you got an aging population. This is serious. You got a financial, all financial projections on this. So if these old people are sick and getting retirement is going to kill your economy, you know this, right? It's a matter of time. But if they're alive and intelligent and connected to the internet, making a living, they're paying taxes. They're a financial asset, not a financial liability. And the cascading effect from the brain to the rest of the body has a lot to do with what puts you in the hospital. Not everything, but a lot. That one thing is a very big deal. Or you can make one that picks up the dust. You have a pile of these things, you put them in the corner, and at the end of the conference, these little things start rolling out all night long, picking up the dust, taking hours, slow motion, and the next morning there's a pile of dirt on the other side. No vacuum cleaner. No vacuum cleaner salesman, no electricity, no trash to pick, it's still trash, but it's not the same way, because then you can put this in some compost pile probably. Anyway, I stress this to say, synthetic biology may be a bigger deal than the Industrial Revolution. And these 30 or 50 studies totally missed that. Very important. Spend some time studying about synthetic biology. Tremendous economic potentials here, by the way. This is where a lot of new growth and jobs actually may come from. Okay, so then what we did is we did a survey that has questions that we thought from our first step were either not asked, like synthetic biology, or badly answered. For example, A lot of the studies said, well, we're going to solve this problem with STEM education, science, technology, mathematics, education, engineering. Okay, good. What percent of a workforce of 6 billion people can really make a living in science and technology and engineering? Not everybody. Probably a minority. All right? What about the rest of the people? Anyway, so we put together this questionnaire. We gave it to our nodes around the world. We have 65 nodes around the world. They identified who should answer the questions, because I won't know who in Iran knows the most, right? Our Iran node will know. And then we took all that information together, and we wrote 3 draft scenarios. Then we took those 3 draft scenarios, and we sent them back out, 3 separate questionnaires, and had people criticize them so that they would be more plausible. Quick pause on scenarios. The way scenario planning is done today is sort of okay. Better than nothing. But that's not the purpose of scenarios, to see what's robust in 4 different views of the future. The purpose of scenarios is to find out what you didn't know that you should have known, but you didn't know enough to even know that. Right? They were created at the Rand Corporation to figure out how to prevent World War III. Because in the past, military historians could tell you all kinds of things, but they were in a different analysis. It was like thermonuclear war it ends the game. So much of the if-then reasoning, the risk analysis, all of that, you had to throw out the door, start from scratch. So they wrote stories to find out what they didn't know. That was the purpose of scenarios. What you see in these little quadrant of 2 uncertainties, make a little grid, what you see there, but how did they get there? They said, well, in this scenario, this. In this scenario, this. No. How did that scenario get there? What are the cause and effect links? It exposes what you don't know. That's the important part. Don't contract out scenario writing to some science fiction writer, because he learns and you don't. Your inside staff should write the scenarios, and it's very important for them to get to points that says, I have no idea. When I did one of these scenarios, they had, on scenario 3, had some guaranteed income. So I said, okay, what's the financial sustainability? I want to do a cash flow projection, right? Cash flow projection, reasonable business tool. Nobody had one. When I started writing, I didn't know that nobody knew what they were talking about. That's a harsh statement, I know, but if you do a business, you should give to a bank your cash flow projection. It's a normal thing to do. I talked to the Swiss, I talked to the Finns, all these people doing this guaranteed income projections and studies, they didn't have cash flow projection. So we had to then integrate that as well. All right, so then we gave these scenarios to these nodes around the world and said, all right, I want you to bring together, you guys could do this. Anyway, you could do this. The idea is you read the scenarios to open up the mind to possibilities. We don't know the truth of the future. Futurists, serious futurists, don't claim to know the truth of the future. A flying saucer could come over Seoul and everything gets changed, right? But what we do know is we know about possibilities. So that's why we do alternative scenarios, to make the point that I'm not saying X is the truth. I want you to think about it. These are possibilities, so what are you going to do today? So then they did these workshops. You say, after you read the scenarios, then you throw them out, and you say, what do we do as a country? So we did a bunch of countries, and a lot of actions came out of that. And that's in that little handout that was in the front, that has those available. Now, to AI. There are 3 kinds of artificial intelligence, and it gets confused. And I am very upset with this confusion because it's hurting decision making. When people say AI, you should ask them, are you talking about narrow AI? Are you talking about general artificial intelligence? Are you talking about super intelligence? So we're talking before about Go, AlphaGo, right? A lot of people in Korea got nervous and said, oh my God, this artificial intelligence stuff, it's here today. Narrow is here today. Not the science fiction stuff of number 3. Right? Narrow the artificial intelligence that drives a car cannot diagnose cancer. But If we get to general intelligence, which we may never get to, by the way, it's not a guarantee. It's very, 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 very tough. So we may never have it. But if I had to take a bet, I'll take a bet. Futures do make bets. You got to make a living, you know. But we don't say it's going to happen for sure. To be an honorable man, I have to say it might not happen. But it might happen, as possible, even in 10 to 15 years. Artificial general intelligence can drive your car, diagnose cancer, make appointments, do all kinds of things, and share and draw on artificial narrow intelligences around the world, the Internet of Things around the world, anything. It can make artificial telephone calls to you, ask your opinion, just like when you're given a novel problem. You ask different people, you read stuff, you do all kinds of stuff. That's what artificial general intelligence is designed to do. And it can share it simultaneously on a common platform. So the advances in one city can be simultaneous with the rest of the city. So the growth of intelligence gets phenomenal with this. So when people talk about doing a lot of STEM education, that's good under narrow intelligence. Good idea. But if by 2030, 2035 we get general, forget it, all bets are off. We can outthink a dog. It's that kind of distinction we're talking about. The distinction, like I said, between narrow and general is it's sort of like saying the internet and a fax machine are tools of the information age. True. But the fax machine and the internet are really different. And that's the kind of confusion that's happening in the world today. We are confusing these two things all the time. When Putin says we're going to, whoever runs AI runs the world, it doesn't mean narrow. He may not know it, but he means general. And when China says we're going to do it in 2030, it may not be clear, but we're really talking general here. That's the big deal. Whoops. Now, superintelligence, the difference between super and general is that superintelligence sets its own goals, independent of your understanding. That's what science fiction is writing about. That's what Elon Musk is warning about. That's why we're all nervous. Well, if general isn't going to be around for a while, and super is after that, why are you panicking now? Here's why. We don't know how long it will take to go from general to super. It could be the next moment, it could be never. By definition, we won't know. Now, as a friendly neighborhood futurist who takes bets, I'll take a bet that superintelligence does happen, but I won't take a bet on how long. So we have to get our standards right before we go into general. Because if we hit general without agreements and standards and good initial conditions, then we lose control. That's where these guys are panicking now, because it's going to take us a long time to get all this stuff together. So we got to start now. Now, the reason we say NT, as I mentioned, these are the technologies that are coming up. Each one of them by themselves is a very big deal. I mentioned synthetic biology and genomics. Computational science is where you do simulations instead of laboratory, which means the speed of scientific breakthroughs will accelerate. Cloud computing, data analytics, I think you all know about this for predictive analytics. That's pretty well understood in the world. Nanotechnology, there's two kinds. What we have today is big machines making little things. That's the nanotech we have today. The big deal is not that. The big deal is, can we make little things, make little bigger things, making little bigger things like nature. A leaf of a plant is atomically precise manufacturing. You can separate hydrogen and oxygen without heat. We don't know how to do that. Right? We will learn, hopefully, how to do nanotechnology in small stuff going up to big stuff. If we do that, that's a giant thing even beyond artificial intelligence as well. Internet of Things, tele-everything, tele-everybody, semantic web. Quantum computing. How many of you know that you can get free access to quantum computing today? Okay, you know it. It's small time. It's only about 5 qubits. You can't do much with that. But it is a quantum computer, and you can get access from IBM. Canada's got D-Wave. They'll sell you, big price, they'll sell you quantum computing. Some people argue whether or not it is or not. But quantum computing is now no longer just a futurist projection. it's in the early stages. The reason that's such a big deal, oh boy, to explain this is too hard. Everybody knows explaining quantum computing is impossible. I mean, it's called quantum mechanics. To make a long story short, quantum computing can do things real fast, which means the idea of encryption's dead. I mean, unless you got your own quantum computing. There's a lot of big implications to this thing, but it's going to a couple of years before it's there. But each one of these are a big deal. Telepresence, holographic communications, intelligence augmentation, collective intelligence, blockchain, 3D, 4D printing, drones, driverless cars, other autonomous vehicles, conscious technology, and the synergies among all these things. That's the big thing. That's what NT is. Just like ICT, the synergies among all these software, hardware, and so forth. Same idea. So we're going to have to start to think like this. The trouble is, people will say, well, it's just about AI. It's not just about AI. It's about all this stuff. And it's about the synergies of these things. Now, I understand there's a few economists in this room, right? Now, it's my understanding that you make wealth by putting things together that hadn't been put together that people want. Right? Well, we're in an accelerated process of doing that now. This is the old way of looking at technology, as if they're separate phenomena. All right? That's misleading. When somebody says they were surprised, what does it mean? It means they didn't turn their head to see the other side. They didn't look around. What's happening is this, the integration of the technology, the synergies of them. So think of a cubic cube where you put things together, and I guarantee you, if you actually tried this, you'll come up with new ideas. It's almost impossible not to come up with new ideas. What's the implications of nanotechnology for synthetic biology? You've never had that question, right? But there are implications. We just haven't thought them through yet. Or you can braid them together. Okay, so we put this stuff together into 3 scenarios just to open up the conversation. The scenarios that's in my table gets them free. You guys got to buy them later on. But anyway, by the way, don't get the hard copy. Get the electronic version, because in a keyword search it's a better deal, and we don't have to mail it. Go electronic. Anyway, each scenario is about 10 pages, and you can see if-thens. How do these things evolve? So you can see, and I went along and I said, don't know about this. Stop writing. Find out. The first one is complicated and mixed bag. Now, the reason we went out to 2050 is because when we studied other people's studies, they all tended to go like 5 years. Maybe 10 at the most, but mostly 5 years. You can't talk about culture change much in 5 years. You can't talk about economic systems changes much in 5 years. But you take all those technologies together, and that's going to be a big impact on culture, on economics. So we figure let's go out to 2050 to give us enough elbow room to actually think of what page, and therefore have early warnings, because some of these things will take years to address. So we got to start thinking about them. But there's still a lot of change in that because if the acceleration of change is accelerating, that means by 2050 it's quite different than now. But that's still business as usual. It's trend forecast. Okay. The second one is political economic turmoil, future despair. I'll talk about each of these in a little bit later. And the third one, everything works. So if you got a friend who's too pessimistic, have them read scenario 3. If you got a friend who's just too optimistic, have them read scenario 2. That'll sober them up real fast. Scenario 2 is a very rough scenario. But all of these are plausible. I mean, we had, discussions about this all around the world, so it doesn't mean that they're going to happen, but they're plausible. Okay. Now, these are just assumptions. Don't take this like an economic forecast. These are just assumptions just to give you a sense of the distinctions. In scenario 1, business as usual, we figure you'll still have 2 billion people, more or less, employed in the normal way we talk about employment. You have a boss, you have an income, and so forth. You have self-employment, about 2 billion. As you know, the trends in that area, because remember, we're doing trend forecasts. So if the trend is going up, that means by 2050, you've got a lot more people in self-employed. So that's about 2 billion. Unemployed or in transition, about 1 billion. And the informal economy, about 1 billion, is, as you know, it's really tough to change the informal economy. Something like, 60% of Egypt? Was there an Egyptian ambassador here, by the way? Good, thank you. 60%, I understand, of your country's informal economy. See? That's what I'm saying. We don't know. But a good guess is a lot of people. To change that in Egypt is very, 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 very difficult. So even out to 2050, but around the world, not just Egypt, we're looking at so we're trying to be plausible here. But even in scenario 3, that's looking good, we still figure about 1 billion people in the best case scenario in the informal. This simply means that, you understand, there's still being economic activity, they're just not paying taxes, they're not registered, and so forth. In scenario 2, you got 1 billion people working, self-employment about 1 billion, unemployed 2 billion, and informal about 2 billion. Now, if the workforce in the year 2000 was about 3 billion, and if the workforce in 2050 is about 6 billion, not the population, just the workforce, then that means in scenario 1, you do have more jobs. Because you got 2 billion here, 2 billion here, that's 4 billion. All right? Scenario 3, you got 4 billion as well. It's just a different mix. Scenario 2, you only got 2 billion. So scenario 2 is the one where we figure you actually end up with fewer jobs. Now, the first one, business as usual, trend projection, increasing acceleration of change in both intelligence and stupidity. Because that's the truth. We have intelligent decisions and we have stupid decisions, right? So part of the trend is you still have stupidity and you still have intelligence going on. Irregular adoption of advanced technology, major employment growth, mostly in biotech industries, high unemployment rate where governments did not create long-term strategies. I don't know if you know this, but a lot of people, World Bank makes this comment, that because they use you as an example. They say, 30, 40 years ago, the basics of Ghana and Korea were about the same. But Korea obviously did a different job. You had some long-term planning, long-term thinking here. Ghana did not have that. Mixed success in universal basic income. Giant corporations grow beyond government control. And then in this government corporate 3D multipolar world of 2050. So you imagine that you've got a hands-free, phone-free, laptop-free AI symbiosis with contact lenses and all kinds of other things. These are actually being 3D printed today, experimental stuff. You've got some stuff here in Korea already where you can do the eye, one of the Korean corporations already has the contact lenses being experimented where you can click and make a photograph and send it off to the internet. But you end up where the distinction between virtual reality and physical reality is who cares? And like in the early days of email, you could make a distinction between a telephone and a computer, but you couldn't separate them. So in the same way, this all gets smushes together. So no one will, like if this is 2050, whether I'm an android, or whether I'm a hologram, or whether I'm in flesh, you don't care. The distinction will just be totally blurred in this sort of a world. Right now, as you know, Elon Musk is trying to put, he's got fibers that have already been tested and robotically implanted in the brain that are something like 50 times smaller diameter than a hair. So this is not just speculation. We may be able to connect the human mind to the internet, and that's a trend forecast. Which means if you take an IQ test and you got pattern recognition software, you can read the IQ test questions, you should be able to get 100% on an IQ test. Right? You wear glasses, I wear glasses, you wear glasses, we all pass the eye test, right? With glasses on. Take glasses off, we don't pass the test. Same thing, augmented geniuses is a possibility. It's a trend forecast. It's a trend forecast. Robots also get all integrated as well. Again, trend forecast. Scenario 2. What happens here is also a projection, but of different assumptions. It assumes that the ideological, introverted people of different groups get increasingly polarized because of information warfare. And it's not just Russia. A lot of corporations can start doing it. Different countries can do it. When they saw that Russia got away with it with the United States, and if I'm in country X and I want a leader in country Y, cost effect, it's a lot cheaper than tanks. less environmental pollution. It's good citizen story. What this means, though, is you end up with a very paranoid world. Not biologically paranoid, but behaviorally paranoid. What the heck can you trust? So the political gridlock increases. Now, the problem here, what's the consequence of this? Consequence is most of the serious stuff in the world need global decisions, like the AI and all the rest of these things. You do everything right on AI, and Japan doesn't, you get the impact still. Right? A lot of the stuff we've got to get right as a whole human family. But we don't, because we're not cutting across systems, because we're not trusting each other. So because they don't get trusted, you got an awful lot of political, economic, environmental migrations that increase ethnic conflicts. You can't have migration into an area without a conflict, most of the time without a conflict. So if you have half the world unemployed and half the world in migration, that's a hell of a lot of conflict. So that makes the current migration stuff look like child's play. Governments did not anticipate the impacts of artificial general intelligence, hence no strategies to address mass unemployment. Because the thing with narrow intelligence, you can see the truck drivers getting unemployed. All right? Not all of the robots come in tomorrow morning. It takes a while to do it. So you can prepare for that. But when you have general intelligence, that's a shift. It's like a phase shift, as we talk about in physics. It's a phase shift. So if governments were not ready for that, 1 year they got 10% unemployment, and the next couple of months or year they got like 50% unemployment. You can't go from 10 to 50 without social chaos. Unemployment explodes in 2030s, leads to 2050 political turmoil. Financial systems cannot support the aging societies. The financial crisis continue in different directions. World order has deteriorated into a combination of nation states, mega corporations, local militias, terrorist groups, and organized crime. So for your friends that are too optimistic, have them read this stuff. It'll sober them up. By the way, organized crime gets twice as much money per year as all of the military budgets combined. I want that to sink in. Think of the entire military operation this year. It's about $1.6, $1.7 trillion. Organized crime, we and others figure, is about $3 to $4 trillion a year. They can buy the best software talent money can buy. And if you can't be bought by organized crime, they'll set up a bunch of shell corporations so it looks like you're not working for them. This is deadly serious. So think of all those NTs I talked about before. Organized crime's got the money to buy them. So, you think you got problems today? It's going to get a lot worse. On top of the organized crime and terrorism and corruption, you added in the new factor of information warfare. So the four of these things together in this scenario makes democracy and free markets an illusion. Now everything's going to be great. Scenario 3, take a breath, everything's fine. Scenario 3, governments did anticipate the impacts of artificial intelligence and put together strategies. Conducted extensive research on how to phase in universal basic income systems. Increased intelligence becomes a goal of education. Pause. When children don't get enough iron and protein between 3 and 5, the brain doesn't develop enough, as it should. You've got periodic starving in North Korea. When East Germany and West Germany got together, it would cost a lot of money, a lot of difficulty, you know the whole story. But East Germans were not starved to death periodically for 50 years or whatever. So you got a much more difficult problem coming up. So this idea of augmented intelligence, you got to learn how to do that because you may need to augment intelligence in North Koreans. Or you can make a mess if you don't do this. Okay. Self-employment promoted, artists. This is one of the key variables in this scenario. Artists, media moguls, entertainers help to foster cultural change for an employment culture to a self-actualization culture. If we don't get, right now people say they are who they are because they have a job. I am an economist. I am a futurist. I am a this. Who says? Well, the boss here says that's what I'm paid for. That's my identity. But if you have to make the shift into the unknown, creating your own life, your own world, connecting to internet, that's a big for most people, a lot of yours are entrepreneurs, so you have no big deal. The average person, that's a big deal. So we're going to need writers and television and movies and so forth to help that transition happen. Otherwise, if the transition happens without this, then they'll have cyber heroin because they've lost their identity, they've lost their self-respect, and it's a very costly deal. Okay, so you all know about the Maslow hierarchy. Civilization may be going through the same thing. This is for the individual, your safety needs and your physical needs, love and belongings. But the world is, if you take the world in 1981, more than half the world was in extreme poverty. Today, it's under 10%. And that's with another 2 billion people growing. All right? So we are winning more than we're losing, by the way. But where we're losing is serious. So the idea of civilization going in this direction seems to be a plausible idea. So one could actually make a living out of being themselves. Like, for example, I'm doing that right now. Am I at work? Am I at play? Am I at leisure? Well, it's a little bit of all three. Right? As far as I know, you're not my boss. So in this scenario, people have AI avatars. By the way the AI avatars may come about is BBVA, it's a bank in Spain. Their head of IT has left, and he's going to be putting together these avatars. So the idea would be, while you go to sleep, your AI avatar goes running around the internet, finding all the investment possibilities for you, all the actions, and then the next morning wakes you up and says, here's the things for you to do. Well, why will banks do this? Because you'll get richer, and banks want you to get richer, right? So they'll give you, just like you get free email services or free this, free that, you'll start to get these free things. But what this means is you can start to make a living as yourself. Because your AI avatar can come back the next morning and say, here's 15 things that you want to do because it's just cool. And here's 15 things that'll earn you some income. And we've already put together smart contracts and da-da-da-da. All you have to do is approve, and you're in business. So you can literally create your future. That's scenario 3. As I said, this is the most optimistic one. Now, with this augmented geniuses stuff, consider what these two guys have created. So what happens if we have billions? I put millions there just to be very conservative. But if you got 9 billion people in 2050, or 10 billion people, and a workforce of 6 billion, and even half of them get augmented, because we've already got half the world in internet now, why wouldn't they have augmented as well? That means billions of geniuses. Now, when you run a company, and everybody is a genius in that company, it's a different management issue, right? It's a different world. We've done a bunch of workshops, collected a bunch of suggestions of what should be done. You can read that in the reports. So I picked out of the 93, these are distilled from all kinds of stuff. There's many more than 93, it's just, there's a lot of overlap, and you got to bring them together. So out of the 93, this is my subjective pulling out. This is not scientific at this point. Some examples here. 1, make intelligence or increasing intelligence an objective of education. We know a lot about brain functioning we didn't know when you were a child. Remember, we used to think that the brain was a static thing, no more neurons, that's it. We now know that's not true. We can, if you're an average IQ, why can't we get you up to 5 or 10% more? Why not? Why shouldn't education? We have physical education, right? We all know that. We could have mental education too. In parallel to STEM education, create hybrid systems of self-paced, inquiry-based learning for self-actualization, creativity, critical thinking, and human relations using AI. Now, I use Korea and Finland in one of these reports as an example. Your test scores and Finland's test scores are about the same. But the systems are really different. I mean, you guys have made a neurotic generation. You're going to learn everything, right? I mean, I'm not telling you something you don't know, right? Finland's is the reverse. No homework, all kinds of creativity and so forth. And they were worried in Finland, said, okay, we'll do this, but we're going to sacrifice test scores. Turned out the test scores were still okay. Right? So the more flexible the thinking process and so forth, the easier you are to adapt. I mean, that's sort of a normal rule of evolution. Create international standards for narrow intelligence and general artificial intelligence with governance system to enhance them or to enforce them. This is extremely important. You know, imagine the world today if we didn't have the International Atomic Energy Agency. We probably would have had a few dirty bombs by now. We might not even be here in this room. So it's important to do this. And the impact of mis-evolution of general intelligence to superintelligence is certainly a big a deal as nuclear bombs. Produce alternative cash flow projections for universal basic income. Now, why do I stress this? Because I was not too crazy about universal basic income when I started this project, this research. But it became clear to me that it's a very likely possibility to have shock waves of unemployment. Now, the social contract today is you go to school, you do well, you get a job, you behave, you get a retirement and some medical stuff. That's the social contract, right? Most of the whole world like that. But if you're thrown out in the streets at 45 and it's not your fault, what does society owe you? You did what you're supposed to do. So this is why we looked at universal basic income as an alternative strategy in scenario 3 to see how that works. Because what kind of society do we want to have? Do we really want to have half the world thrown out in the streets? That's not a cool idea. So there's a lot of ways to do this wrong. So we should begin to study it and learn from each other how to do this. Put memes are ideas that can spread around, in advertisements to help the cultural transition to new forms of economics and work. Create personal AI avatars to match people's needs and skills. Shift education systems from learning, mastering a profession to mastering skills. Skills will still be important, important. But particular professions can change. How many lawyers we got in here? You got, a couple here. I know. Well, an awful lot of the legal profession is research and paperwork. Well, an awful lot of that can be done. By the way, that reminds me, I was asked about applying artificial intelligence to business as a generalization. So let me pause and give you this. You take your production process, whatever production process it is, whether it's garments, whether it's newspapers, doesn't matter. What is your production process? From research to product design, list it out. And within each of those, what are the repetitive behaviors? And then those repetitive behaviors on each of those things can be AI. And that's your marching orders to an outside contractor. I don't do that, so somebody else do that. And that's how I always start. So if people ask, how do I start changing my organization to AI? Lay out your whole process first. Don't ask an AI company to come in and do it for you. That's, no. Your job, you got to because you'll know what that is. And then what's the repetitive within each step? And then each one of those, you do the AI. And then you have a process. Okay. Public-private research to explore cultural transition for a social contract between government and the citizens who potentially could be both unemployed and augmented geniuses. So imagine in scenario 2, if you got a whole lot of people unemployed, but they can steal from organized crime, augmented geniuses, you got a much more difficult opponent than you had before. Okay. I'm not going to read these things, but the PowerPoint will be available to you, so you can go through all this sort of stuff later on. These are the different suggestions for different sectors of society. And the point here is, it's not just STEM education. We got to do a whole lot of things to make this transition work. Okay. Now, here's the AI and governance. It is argued that if we start a governance system and standards system too early, we will stifle the development of AI. Okay? Here's the counter. We won't have this done for 10 to 15 years. Imagine getting agreements between China and the United States on artificial intelligence. That's not going to happen in a day. It's going to take 10 to 15 years, at least, to do this. So we're not stopping any innovation in the process. We're learning. Some AI experts, artificial general intelligence experts, believe it's possible as soon as 10 years. Might not be, but military research tends to be ahead of civilian stuff. So it's maybe happening around the corner faster than we think. So since it's likely to take 10 or more years, we've got to develop these international standards and so forth now. And right now the Millennium Project is exploring, do we want to do this study or not? Just like when we did the other one, what's the status of this question? These are the players in the system today that are working on it. Some potential models, you can do the International Atomic Energy Agency or the World Trade Organization model. There's a bunch of other models that can be done. So we want to assess the studies, do some scenarios, and then make the results available. A few words about the Millennium Project. It was put together by UN organizations, governments, NGOs, foundations, corporations, universities, into a trans institution. The people who do the work, where the money comes from, and the direction, it comes from all these institutional categories, not a majority of anyone. Which has the advantage, I'm just about finished, which has the advantage that we have to make sense of the bottom line because business is there. We have to make sense politically because government is there. We have to make sense values because NGOs are there. We have to make sense internationally because UN is there. But it also means that we can act through those organizations. We were studied by the UN some years ago, and they can't figure out how we do what we do because we're not acting like a regular organization. Take the best of each and go forward. So we got 65 of these things around the world. We produced a State of the Future report. You can, again, don't buy the print, download it. We also do methods, by the way. A lot of people don't realize this. We have the largest methods collection. There's 37 different methods, so there's no right way to do the future. So there's a lot of different methods. So you mix and match your methods as you need. We've done 55 studies so far. This is just to impress you that we've actually tried to do cumulative research. So each research we do leads into the next, like your brain. New information in your brain, you see how it associates with other stuff. Hopefully you get smarter as you go along. Same idea. This is a report you also can download. This is, it was printed in Pakistan. The job was not great, so we're going to print. So you can't get the print right now, but you can get the little piece of paper so you can get the electronic version. We put all this together into a collective intelligence system, and you ought to do your own collective intelligence system, because consider the brains in this room and the experience in this room. Imagine if you could actually provide some coherence for Korea. It would be really great. So that's all I got to say. We can have some questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Glenn, for your very enlightening speech this morning. When I told him that he has 40 minutes for his speech, he said he could talk all day. So that's I should have
and night too.
Okay, all right. We only have 5-10 minutes for question. Mr. Kim, could you? Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Glenn, for a very eye-opening and very scary scenario that you put up. You started out with the question of throughout the history. New technology brought in more jobs. Now we reached the stage where that can continue. In fact, one of the problems I feel in this scenario is that ultimately, in the past, we have transferred the task from lower part of the body to the brain. Now we feel that can the brain keep up with this thing? 60 years ago when I started computer programming, few people knew what computer was. Now I feel challenged by my smartphones. Okay? And you brought a very good question of increasing intelligence, but 5-10% increase in IQ in the face of this challenge is almost like a Band-Aid and aspirin for the cancer patients. I already see the example of this. You look out throughout the world, the global leaders are not up to the task of what they can do. So that's a very, very low technology area. And if you look at this kind of things, quantum development and technology, can human beings exist as a meaningful existence? In fact, aren't we on the self-destruct mode? Thank you.
Okay, let's talk about that Band-Aid. Let's say your eyesight is 20/30. You can adjust the glasses so you're 20/20. Let's say your eyesight is 20/50. You can adjust the glasses to it. So my point is that no matter what your intelligence is, we can augment it. Now I said 5 to 10%. That was like one of the areas. There's about 10. If you look on our website, there's about 10 areas to increase intelligence, not just one. So each of these added together can be more. So the idea of an augmented genius is plausible. Now, we all know the first stuff is used by wealthy people. But then the price comes down, the market expands, price goes down further, the market expands, and so forth. So that Band-Aid can be augmented itself. All right? Now remember, there's 3 scenarios here. There's not one. 3 scenarios. And I would challenge you to read those 3 scenarios at leisure and then ask yourself the question again, because a lot of it is answered in there. Now, if you believe that these problems cannot be addressed, what's the logical conclusion? Do nothing and have cyber heroin or some other version. That's a bad conclusion, right? Remember Hamlet, the guy put poison in the guy's ear. So if we keep telling the next generation, forget it, it's over. They're not going to try. Now, I've studied this sort of stuff for 45 years. There's not a single question or problem there are not answers to. Not a single one. I'm talking about some really nasty stuff. Problem is, goes to the other part of the question about the leaders. We don't have good leadership. We don't have good decision making. That's true. That doesn't mean new forms of leadership can't come out, like the landmine treaty. That's a new form of leadership, a person acting on their own, creating something that actually made a difference. Right? Now, it's important what we believe. The only contribution the United States has made to philosophy is called pragmatic philosophy, which basically says we don't know the truth, but we can know it works. So if it works, we'll call it true. If it doesn't work, we'll say it's false. It doesn't work to be pessimistic. It does work to look at negative stuff, but it doesn't work to be pessimistic. Now, we've been studying indicators for the future of civilization, again, in the Millennium Project for over 20 years. Yeah, 20 years. And I can tell you that on that data, we're winning more than we're losing. So we have no right to be pessimistic. But where we're losing is deadly serious, as you point out. So we have no right to go to sleep either. And to me, that's the rational position. We went hard-headed, pragmatic, serious idealists. We don't need pessimism. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, please, Mr. Ambassador.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for a very impressive and eye-opening and confusing feeling in the future. Just trying to put things into perspective. You have been working in this business for so many years. You just mentioned 45. The Millennium Project is like 26 years or something. As you go along to try to put things into perspective, how accurate were you? I mean, you had enough time to judge some of your earlier results. I assume also you're improving as you're learning more about the methodology and improving things. Yeah. So how much confidence do you think your predictions were? Like how many percent? It might give us also a perspective in predicting the future, reading through your stuff.
Right.
How confident are you?
We wanted to be wrong about all predictions on thermonuclear war. Right? Sometimes you do a scenario or a story or a projection to be proven wrong. It's like climate change. Right? When we do those projections, we don't want to get to 1,000 parts per million. That's crazy. We're gone. So sometimes you alert. Right? So the idea isn't to be accurate, is to be useful. Is it useful to give a warning? Yes. Right? Have my warnings been taken seriously? A lot of them have. Now, if you want to know in the conventional sense, did I talk about stuff 30 years ago? There's a book called Future Mind I wrote 30 years ago, and in there I talked about the talk. The tree of knowledge. The talk is what we have in our pocket today. And I described 30 years ahead of time the talk, the cell phone, the smartphone. Also, information warfare. You read the defense chapter, you take out the word USSR, put in the word Russia, and it reads like the present tense, unfortunately. So unfortunately, I've been right in some negative areas that I would like to have been wrong in. But again, I jokingly say we'll take bets. Okay, we'll do that. But it's not our business to predict, to say X will happen. It's to say X will happen if you don't do something. Y could happen if you do something. So which am I right about? Are you useful or not? That's the idea. Are you useful or not? And one evaluation of useful is, do you get invited back to give another talk in Korea? Okay?
May I?
Shukran.
May I throw out just one question to you?
Yep.
For the interest of our audience, as a renowned futurist, what would you say about the future of Korea?
Yeah.
Do you think Korea will be better placed in 2050 than today, or not? Okay. I think this is a pretty tough question.
Good. But that's all right. But this goes back to my friends from Egypt question. The object is, will you take seriously, Korea, the warnings laid out and act in response to those? How you act is your own judgment, but at least these are warnings. If you're dealing with unification down the road, are you going to look at how do you augment intelligence? Because you don't want to. I don't want to say 1%, but a lot of North Koreans are mentally retarded. It's got nothing to do with genetics. It's got to do with being starved. They have the genes to be intelligent, right? They're your brothers and sisters. But they haven't been treated nicely, and so their brains haven't developed. So if you reunite and you don't plan ahead on this, then I would predict, if you don't do it, you've got a financial problem bigger than Germany had. All right? I think that Korea has a number of interesting situations. One, by having Japan, China, and North Korea around, it sort of keeps you on your toes. It's hard for you to fall asleep. It's not like Hawaii. You're in the Pacific, it's very nice weather, you can relax. You have a hard time relaxing here, which means your brain is more active than average, in my judgment. Two, because you've had such rapid change, you understand that rapid change is possible. I would say that as a culture, Korea is more future-looking. Doesn't mean it's looking well, but future-looking as a culture than others. I told you when I first came to here, I stayed at the Sheila Hotel. And as you know, there's a bus that goes to Sheila, Laloda, and 5 major hotels. And I was there with SBS on media, and had a big banner, the future of telecommunications or something, right? The next place the bus went to, the future is something else. And I'm not kidding you. I can pass a lie detector test. All 5 hotshot hotels had the future of something. I said, what's going on here? Now, there's a part of your story that is maybe not totally known. Remember Park Chung-hee, elementary school teacher, created the greatest economic miracle so far, right? That's pretty unusual. The Cold War was going on. And there was another futurist named Herman Kahn, who invented scenarios, by the way. He was one of the top futurists in my time. He hung out with Park Chung-hee a lot of times. You can check this out. Now, the trouble is, the people who didn't like, this is being recorded, isn't it? Well, it was nice knowing you all. But this is an important story you should know. The people who don't like Park Chung-hee, because he was a pretty tough character, right? Don't want to be reminded necessarily of how much success he had. The people who like him don't want to be reminded that an American had something to do with it, an American futurist. And this is why I bring it up. I would say that when people say, what's the value of futures research? This story is one of the best stories. But you haven't heard about it because no one is interested in having that story. It has been written up. It's a book. It's not been published. It's in Korean. So you have a tradition here of listening to crazy people like me. All right? I mean, you invited me. I didn't ask. You know? I didn't even know what all you guys were doing, But you have an openness that will serve you well if you don't get too pessimistic. But you don't want to have optimism without tested by pessimism. Pessimism is important, but it's not the food. It's sort of the spice, right? I think Korea can do very well because you've already proven to yourself what's possible. I mean, look at Korea. And, the classic example is Ghana versus South Korea. It's used by people around the world. But what you've got to do is now you've got to make a transition, because before you were in a catch-up economy. That's what they did, we can do that. That's what they did, we can do that. You've done it. You've caught up. You've caught up. Not in everything, but you've caught up enough that you're not in a catch-up economy. You're there now. You're on an equal playing field with the major powers of the world. You're not as big as China. But in the sense of knowing, having knowledge of artificial intelligence and all these other things, we're together now. And so you have the advantage of being on your toes, because of your geographic position, geopolitical position, and because of your history. You know it's possible. So I think I want you to have a great future. But don't let pessimism throw you in jail.
I think it's time to close, unless you have a question. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed for your
감사합니다.
brilliant presentation. Thank you.